Hi, everybody. Welcome back. Before we dive deeper into recording, I thought it would be important for us to take a little bit deeper look at sound and think about sound from a little bit more scientific perspective and from a perception perspective to really sort of ground our conversations about recording. So we're going to take a look at acoustics and audio fundamentals in this lecture today. So what is sound? Right? Sound is something that was so fundamental to our experience, our lived experience day to day, that we can often sort of like take it for granted, right? But what is sound? Right? We can often think about, this old adage of if a tree fall in the forest, does somebody hear it? Right? So we can look at that sort of expression from two different perspectives, right? So from physics, sound is a vibration that propagates as an acoustic wave through a transmission medium such as gas, liquid, or solid, right? So sound we think of traveling through the air, but anybody who's lived in an apartment knows that sound can travel through solids, right? You can hear your neighbors through the walls. And underwater, right, we can also hear sounds underwater too. So in human physiology and psychology, sound is the perception of waves and their perception by the brain, right? So we can really think about that question of the tree falling in the forest. Depends on what lens we're looking at through, right? If we're thinking about it through physics, of course, it creates a sound. The tree falls, disturbs the air pressure, a sound is made. If we think about it through psychology, well, if the sound needs to be heard and we're not there, maybe there's no sound. So it really just depends on which of those sort of disciplines you're thinking about that question from. So measuring sound. Let's talk about these terms because they're going to be really important when we get to editing music and recording music. So how do we what sort of measurements do we have? Sort of like when we were talking about weight, we have pounds or kilograms. So a sound wave has three basic physical properties: frequency, which is the number of cycles per second, and musically speaking, it determines pitch. Right? Amplitude, right, is the size of the wave. It determines loudness. Right? And waveform is the wave shape. It determines timbre, right? A same instrument could play the same note, but we know the difference between a trumpet and a horn, right? Because of their difference in timbre. Even though they might be playing the same pitch, our ears are very fine-tuned to hear the differences in the shape of the wave and its harmonic content, and that's how we can distinguish different sounds. Air pressure oscillations. Right, to understand frequency, we need to understand that sound is created through changes in air pressure. Let's think of a violin, right? When a string is being bowed, it's being pushed back and forth. It's physically moving, right? And that physical movement creates changes in air pressure, right? When the air pressure is being made more dense, that's called compression. And when it's being stretched out, when that string moves away, that's called rarefaction. So those are the two things that cause those changes in air pressure, right? We have our compression, are being made more dense, and rarefaction. Another great thing to think about for these terms is a kick drum, right? When you have on a drum set, the kick drum, the beater is pushing that drum, right? All those air molecules, the second that beater hits the drum head, are getting more compressed, right? And then immediately they're getting pulled back out. So that's that compression and rarefaction. You can see that picture there. So frequency. So over time, as the string oscillates, the level of air pressure on a side oscillates back and forth between high pressure and low pressure. The oscillation of the sound pressure creates a vibration that our ears perceive as pitch. The faster the vibrations occur, the higher the pitch's wave's frequency. So let's think about frequency, right? We're going to need some sort of way of measuring this. So frequency is measured in hertz, or Hz is the abbreviation, which tells us the number of cycles or oscillation a wave goes per second. So it's really interesting to think about any kind of sound. If you took any kind of clicking sound and you sped it up to 440 times per second, you'd hear an A, right? So any kind of repetition within a second creates a solid pitch. That's sort of what determines our hearing, right? When we hear something that's less than 20 cycles per second, we hear them as sort of individual events. But if something happens more than 20 times per second, we start to hear it as a constant musical note. There's some great videos online that you can find those examples of like moving from individual to pitch. As I kind of mentioned, right, we have a sort of limited range that we can hear, right? There's all kinds of frequencies going on. The human hearing is sort of this area right here, right? Between 20 hertz and 20 kilohertz or 20,000 hertz. So some animals like bats go up to, they can create and hear sounds up to like 80 kilohertz, right? So much higher than humans. Elephants and whales, animals that are able to communicate across miles and miles, long distances, use this what's called infrasound. So sounds that are below 20 hertz. This is really interesting and it's something that before we had modern recording technology, didn't even know what was going on. We didn't know how these animals were communicating across distances because we didn't have the ability to record them and speed them up so we're able to actually perceive them. So there's lots of things going on in the world, right? Ultrasound is used in medical technology, and we just have this sort of limited acoustic range is what we as humans can hear. Good to think about this stuff. So noise, right? If a sound does not have a regular vibration for say the sound of a cymbal, right? It doesn't create a pitch, but instead noise, right? This is a technical term, not just what your mother or grandmother yells at you to turn down that noise when you're playing your music too loud in your room, right? So white noise is the presence of all frequencies at equal volume. I'll have an example here. I'm going to put this in D2L so you can hear white noise. It's a very familiar sound if you have ever used the old CRT TV and tuned it to a channel that you didn't have, or you're using the antenna and you're not able to get a signal, you'll hear that noise. So that kind of covers frequency. Let's talk about amplitude, right? Now we're thinking about how do we measure volume. So here we can see a sine wave, which is a very simple wave, increasing in amplitude. We can see it's not increasing in frequency because we can see the distances are staying the same. If you see the lines I'm drawing here, they're not getting more spread out. They're not getting close together. They're just getting bigger, right? So that as these get bigger going up, you'll hear that sound increasing in volume. This might sound like this, right? So we have starting quiet, getting louder. So a wave's amplitude is determined by how significant the changes in sound pressure are. Higher changes in sound pressure result in higher amplitudes. Going back to our compression rarefaction, the more severely those are being compressed and then the more severely they're being sort of rarefacted, the higher the volume. So measuring amplitude, think ahead. If you know that, I'll give you a second. Say it out loud. What's the unit we're going to use? So if you know it, good. If you don't, now you do. This is decibels, named after Alexander Graham Bell. When associating them with loudness, we usually measure ratios of two sound pressure levels. What is being used as a reference point changes on context. In common usage, the reference point is the threshold of human hearing, which we consider to be 0 dB. So if something is 0 dB, it doesn't mean that there's actually no physical movement in that sound. It just means that it's become imperceptible to humans. So the decibel is a perceptual measure of loudness. Here we have some common events and the different, decibel levels, like you can see like a mechanical watch ticking, or leaves rustling, background music about 60 decibels, right? And then above this threshold here of 70, these are sounds that can cause physical damage to your hearing over time. Landscaping equipment, that's why it's important to wear protective earphones when mowing your lawn, right? Or city traffic, or sitting in a noisy restaurant, right? A DJ at a school dance, right? And then you get into these very loud things like a jackhammer, a jet engine, those type of things are up in like the 130, 135. So you can see there's very few sounds that are actually kind of safe for our ears. So it's important to really think about, as musicians, as music technologists, protecting our hearing. A really cool thing that I was really introduced to when I just started studying this was perceived volume, the relationship between amplitude and frequency. So our ears perform sort of subtle magic in the background when they're turning vibrations into a signal our brain can interpret as sound. We interpret different frequencies at the same volume to be at different amplitudes, even though they're not. In general, low frequencies are harder for us to hear and therefore need to be boosted and overcome to come across as the same apparent volume. So I want to talk about this sort of idea as the Fletcher-Munson curve. It can be a little confusing when you first think about it, but what you need to think about, the grounding for this, is sort of the evolution of our ability to hear. Our ears are fine-tuned to hear speech, to hear sort of the sounds of animals that might be threatening, and those happen in a certain frequency range, right? They don't happen in the super low frequency range, and they don't happen in the super high frequency range, right? We don't really have to worry too much about small birds or bats, right? We're worried more about saber-toothed tigers or about bears, right? So what are the frequency ranges that those animals produces? Or what are the frequency ranges that our mother and father produce when they're talking to us as a child, right? Our ears are fine-tuned to sort of pick up those frequencies more carefully and reject, the sounds of geological movements that are below 20 hertz, or the sounds of, a certain bird that only produces a certain high frequency. So the exact relationship of frequency and perceived amplitude is displayed on what is known as the Fletcher-Munson curve. The graph uses isophones, curves that show equal perceived loudness to show how frequency is affected by volume. So, for example, this is sort of our sweet spot. Let me go with a different color here. This is our sweet spot of hearing, right? Between this sort of like 1,000 and 10K. So when we're amplifying sounds, they need almost no gain boost. Imagine you're boosting a fader on a mixer, right? As soon as we turn it up a little bit, we'll be able to hear it. But a sound that's at 20, that at this level might need about 70 decibels, a significant amount of boost to be heard at the same volume that we'd hear something here, right? So it's basically just showing us that our ears are fine-tuned towards this mid-range. So here's sort of a question for you. Why is this important? Why, if we're going to be mixing and recording music, why should we know that? So I'll have an area below, and you can go ahead and put your comments about that. Why is perceived volume important? How will this inform how we mix music, how we record music? Share with me your thoughts. I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say. Okay, feel free to take a quick break, grab a quick coffee or something. We've covered a lot of information in just 12 minutes here. We have a couple more things I wanted to go over in this presentation, primarily this idea of timbre, transience, and harmonic context. Big picture, timbre has become a lot more important in music, right? As we've moved from bands who all play the same instruments, bass, guitar, drums, maybe piano, vocals, right? If all bands are using the same instruments, it's really about the songcraft, right? But in our modern music world, the producer and the recording engineer play such a central role. What is the vocal chain? What kind of effects are they using on the voice? What kind of synthesizer are they using? How are they affecting the kick drum and the snare? So in modern music, timbre is so important to establishing, musical identity. It's sort of on par with what, lyrics and, chord progression melody would be a few generations ago. So an important part of timbre is the transient. So the transient's the very first part of a waveform, right? So this is how we could tell the difference between, a finger-picking acoustic guitar and acoustic guitar that's played with a pick, right? Acoustic guitar that's played with a pick will have much more transient and have much more initial attack to the sound, right? We have that hard plastic piece of plastic hitting the strings versus the soft fingertip. So drums are things that have lots of transients. Anything that has a plucked sound or is a percussive sound will have more transients versus a bowed or woodwind instruments will have a smoother transient. So a transient is a short duration, non-tonal, non-periodic sound element that has a high amplitude and typically comprising of high frequency components. In the case of sounds generated by musical instruments, transients are inherently present at the beginning of the tonal waveforms and are also critical to the instrument's oral signature and recognition. Another part of timbre is the harmonic series. So when we read music, it can often be sort of misleading, right? We see an A on the staff, treble clef, an A. If we see that note, we just think, oh, I'm playing a single note. Well, yes, you are doing a single physical gesture on your instrument. That note, if we look at it from a scientific perspective, contains many notes, right? It'll contain the fundamental, and contain different harmonic partials. So this is really important to giving each instrument a singular sound, and each singer their own sound, right? The sort of balance of those different partials in the spectrum. If we look here, the balance of those partials will determine timbre. So I'll share this. There's some really great tools online that you can use to explore the sort of harmonic series and what that sounds like. It's a great way to get your students to think about that. Yeah, and it's a simple mathematical grounding. We'll talk later in the semester about finding collaborations between music and STEM, and this is a great maybe starting place, right? To think about an octave is the frequency times 2, right? That's it. If you want the next harmonic, it's the original frequency times 3, and then times 4, and times 5, times 6, times 7, and 8. So there's simple mathematical ratios. This is just simple multiplication. So it's really kind of cool to think about when we hear an octave, it sounds good to us because it's a simple mathematical ratio. Again, I talked about this a lot in this lecture. Our ears are doing all kinds of really cool things as they transform sound into something our brain can understand. And there's a real beauty to, the way that we perceive sounds, and what we perceive as consonant and dissonant is grounded in simple physical properties. So here we can see the harmonic series sort of laid out on a note, right? So if you went to a piano and played a C, all the other strings related to that C will start to vibrate, like an octave up, an octave and a fifth up, 2 octaves up, an octave and a third up. What do we have here, folks? Let's see. C, G, and E, right? You all know that's our C major chord. So major chords, right? They weren't just arbitrarily picked as this sort of thing that sounds nice, right? They exist within every single note that we hear. So our music theory is really just reinforcing things that come from nature. Now, with a grain of salt, right? Hold on a second here. Yes, Dr. Arne, but right, in Western notation, we've kind of made a compromise, right? To be able to play music in all 12 keys, we've had to detune these slightly. So definitely, if you're into microtonality or into just studying the physics of music, you can see all the temperament systems. Really interesting thing to study. If you have students, maybe high school, middle school students that are really into math and science, maybe try to turn them on to studying this stuff about different temperament systems. It can be really interesting. But I just wanted to kind of point out that about the harmonic series there. Great. Let me know. Send me an email with any questions that you have. Reach out in the forums to your peers. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. This, I think, will give us a really good foundation as we continue on and start to look at recording and editing music. Thanks.